Hello, hello, and welcome to Artpop Talk. I'm Bianca.
And I'm Gianna. Bianca, did you ever feel like because you're an art historian, you don't get to hate on art?
Oh, Gianna, absolutely. Unfortunately, because lots of people get to casually say that they don't like art or they hate art or they're not into this. I never get to say that because I feel like I have to keep art on its pedestal and keep making sure that people actually like it because I need a job.
I actually sometimes feel like we get to intellectually hate on art and we get to keep up with the snobbery of it all. Do you ever feel like you can't hate on art, or even if you do, it is still keeping up with the elitism and snobbery in the field?
Yes.
Well, sis, you are all in luck because today we are talking about all the art we love to hate, because sometimes we just need to rant about the things that are just not it.
We'll be thinking about some questions like, why aren't we allowed to say that we don't like a work of art? What are the benefits of art historical critique? And how could art education benefit from embracing some hating on art? So Gianna, are you ready to art pop rant today?
I love a good rant. I am ready.
Let's get into it. Hey Gianna, you have been a little busy bee this past weekend. I've been bothering Gianna so much. I feel so bad.
She's
just been
not
bopping around, and I'm texting her like, I know you're like moving apartments and getting your life together, but what about the podcast?
No, you have not. Bianca's been holding down the fort this week. Guys, I'm so sorry, but I have not been this physically and mentally tired since I did like my BFA thesis. I don't know. I also did a little float trip on the Illinois River, and that was really fun, but my body is sunburned. I lived on a third floor apartment complex and then was moving to a different unit on the third floor. So also my calves have not been this sore since I was a little brat 7th grader playing tennis. Like, oh my gosh, they are.
Get those calves in shape.
My calves are weak. My body is wrecked.
That's really funny.
So yeah, I'm here and I'm ready for this art pop talk. I love a good rant. I feel like I'm in a very ranty mood since my body is just not it right now.
Excellent.
As well. So my emotional state really fits the vibe of this episode.
Good. Well, I'm so glad to hear it. Something that's been on my mind just really quick before we get into art news is I needed to talk to you about Ever After.
Did you see the TikTok I sent you for the matching Ever After tattoos?
Yes, and it made me cry. Gianna, I literally cried.
But the thing is, I know you're going to make me get like the horse mask. And you're going to get like, I'm going to get the peacock one and I'm going to be the fucking horse mask.
I'm sorry, but I'm absolutely Marguerite.
I'm the girl over at the banquet eating the goddamn carrot.
Jacqueline. I only came here for the food.
I did only come here for the food.
Oh my gosh, that is so funny. Well, last week, Gianna and I, in the recording process, Gianna was trying to say the word contest, but it kept just like, it's just one of those times where you're reading something and it's just like the flow never comes out right.
I think it was because it was plural, like contests.
Right. And so then when Gianna kept saying it over and over, I thought she was saying contest, or that's just what I was hearing. And all I could think of was Drew Barrymore saying contest Nicole de Lancre, because that's the only other time in my life I've ever heard anyone use the word contest. And so then this weekend I watched Ever After, and it is such a good movie.
Yeah.
It is such a good movie. And I remember when we were little, I was obsessed with that part where she comes in like her angel wings and she's like, just breathe. And I was obsessed with it. And it's also, a little arty because Leonardo da Vinci is like a main character of the movie. And of course, our queen Angelica Houston is just
she is everything.
This is I don't know. I think it may be my favorite role of hers.
I also just feel like
unreal.
Angelica Houston, like I have always thought that mom looks like Angelica Houston. They have
1000%
that Roman, beautiful, like arched nose, and they have the
same
high cheekbones, same complexion, and like we're both like evil stepsisters,
long black hair.
And, yeah, I don't know. So I feel like that movie is a vibe.
I feel like Adrian definitely is Cinderella.
Oh yeah,
or
no,
Danielle.
we're the worst. Yeah,
and yeah, I'm definitely okay
like,
with being Marguerite.
Yeah, I get that because at least I'm a little bit nice to her.
Are you saying I'm not nice?
I mean, I'm not saying you're not nice. I'm just saying like you didn't come here for the food. You had ulterior motives, Bianca.
Oh, 1000%. I'm here for the prince. I love Prince Henry.
Yeah, I mean, like you're sponsorship thirsty over here.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I'm really just here for a good
drama. The bees.
The bees. There was a bee.
There was a bee.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to tell everyone that if you haven't seen Ever After, I just needed to talk about it a little because revisiting it this weekend was quite excellent. I cried. I was bawling my eyes out at the end.
Yeah.
And then it's so good. Oh my gosh.
Okay, well let us know what you think about getting some Ever After matching tiny tattoos because that could be very cute.
Yeah. The peacock and the horse.
You should honestly just get a bee and be like, there was a bee.
B for Bianca.
And then I could just be like, I only came here for the food. I've always wanted to get
You could get the carrot.
Yeah.
That she eats.
You could get a bee and I could get a carrot.
Oh my god.
Fucking A.
On the tiny tattoo note.
Yeah.
Are we ready for some art news?
Indeed.
All right, before we get into art news for today, I just wanted to offer a trigger warning for police brutality. Last week, the Museum of Contemporary Art Cleveland announced a, quote, dynamic new board of directors and a more inclusive board leadership model. This came in response to what media outlets are calling, quote unquote, controversy surrounding the museum last summer when the museum canceled a show titled, quote, The Breath of Empty Space. The exhibition was a showcase of drawings by the New York artist Sean Leonardo that depicted white police officers fatally harming Black and Latino men and youths, among them Eric Garner, Freddie Gray, and Walter Scott. For some background on Leonardo, who identifies as an Afro-Latino artist, Art21 states that, quote, through drawing, performance, and public participatory workshops, Leonardo explores the constraints of masculinity and the ways that systems of oppression and violence have crafted and contorted societal expectations of Black and brown bodies. So the show at MoCA Cleveland was originally meant to open in March of 2020, but clearly March is when the pandemic emerged, and amongst that and the week of George Floyd's murder, the director of the museum at the time canceled the show. And I think that term canceling is pertinent, which Gianna and I will get into here in a second. So it's also important to note that the museum canceled the show without consulting the artist. He said, quote, Leonardo, after grave mishandling of communication regarding the exhibition, institutional white fragility led to an act of censorship. Since its cancellation in Cleveland, Leonardo's show has been hosted at the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art and the Bronx Museum of the Arts. And in early 2020, before the pandemic, it was on view at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. Changes to MoCA's board were then recommended by the museum's governance committee and were unanimously approved. Now the museum has 3 newly named co-presidents, Audra T. Jones, Joanne R. Cohen, and Stephen Sockney, presiding over a diverse committee. Audra is MoCA's first African-American board co-president, and Stephen is the first LGBTQ board co-president. Each incoming co-president will serve a 2-year term, and all the articles that I was reading also made a point to add that the outgoing president, Larry Oscar, is, quote, hailed by the institution as an accomplished visionary. This trustee will remain on the board. So I thought that was weird to me.
I'm very apprehensive of the word hailed. I do not like that word.
Me neither. It made me feel icky.
It's aggressive.
I don't know. Yes, I think so too. The museum said in a statement, quote, as a nation, we are in a time that demands more from museums, artists, and collaborative spaces. Beyond being agile, proactive about inclusion, and purveyors of interactive experiences. This is the word that bothers me. Wait. Contemporary museums must answer the call to represent the ideas and creators of our time fully. Our cohort of new directors represents skills that enhance our overall governance, and best of all, they represent a diversity of professional insight. So, Gianna, what are your thoughts on the new board and this move from MoCA Cleveland?
I have a hot take. So this art news story is something that we keep covering, right? Yeah. This keeps happening. Shows get canceled instead of working to better the institution. And also that museum statement of also putting the artists in there, that our nation demands more from artists. I don't know. It's kind of like you're mixing them into the situation, which is really
your fault?
Your institution's fault, which, especially when you didn't consult the artist about canceling their own exhibition. So That leaves a bad taste in my mouth. We keep seeing this happen. There's a call from the community to have a more diverse staff, and that is absolutely accurate. However, I feel as though what we don't always talk about, and the issue with this, because we don't live in a perfect world, and obviously if we did live in a perfect world, then this wouldn't have to be an issue. But I really, really wish that we would start talking about the tokenism of it all. Mm-hmm. And I really hate that we have to cherry pick people, underrepresented people, to have on these boards and only hire them because they are either gay or a person of color. Because unfortunately, that is how we have a call and we have a need for those people, and they are long overdue to be in those spaces. So what other way are we having to go around it? But it is so freaking frustrating, the tokenism of it all. And those people should be in those spaces because they are meant to be there, not because we cherry pick them. And it's just frustrating. So I'm tired of reading these museum statements about how, they're working to have a more inclusive and persevering experience and staff, when no, you are having to cherry pick people because now you have pressure from your community to do so because you have not put people in those spaces that should have already been there. So instead of this bullshit statement, why don't you just tell us exactly what you're doing? I'm really sick of it, because there are also people in the aftermath of that whole process and picking those people, just even when you think of an interview process, that are affected by that. So you're already pushing out a certain population of people in order to cherry pick people. Again, that's what we need. That's a call from our community, and we do not live in a perfect world. But I wish that we would just be more honest about the things that we're demanding and the responses that we're getting back from these institutions.
Yeah, I completely see what you're saying. And it's interesting that you say that, because I was just listening to the Hysteria podcast yesterday, and they were talking about how I think New York may have its first woman governor with the Cuomo situation. But the host, Aaron Ryan, was saying this is just so frustrating because of course I'd be excited for that to happen. But how many times is a woman put in a position because a man failed? And it's just frustrating. And that's also kind of part, it reminds me, it's not exactly what you're talking about, but the glass cliff situation where women are put in positions of, you know, being a CEO or in charge of a company when the company isn't doing well. And then if they don't succeed, it's, oh, just because she was a woman. And then they'll bring in, you know, a man whenever something goes wrong.
No, I think it's very much wrapped in that. And the other effed thing is that we are having these people come in to basically clean up all the aftermath of this shit, and then we're using them also for their otherness continually.
Right. So that is the thing that pisses me off, because I was thinking about going back to that word canceled. They canceled the show. And earlier, we'll have to find what episode and link it for you guys, but we talked about a show at, I think it was Baltimore, that was canceled, and it was the same type of situation. It was canceled because the white people at the museum didn't actually care about putting in the work. They just didn't want to do the work, and that's basically what it came down to. And they came out with all these like bullshit examples of like why this wasn't an appropriate time and things like that. It's like, no, you're just all a group of white people who don't want to hire people of color, who aren't interested in putting in the work, who aren't interested in reaching out to diverse community members, diverse artists. Like, it's so frustrating. And I feel, so this is actually kind of something that happened at my work in the fall of 2020. We were supposed to open a show with Kara Walker and Moses Williams, and then a Horace Pippin show. And these shows have been in the works for a very long time, but they weren't canceled. Thankfully, they were able to be postponed, and they're now opening this fall. And sometimes whenever there are traveling exhibitions or the works don't come from a permanent collection, museums plan these shows so far in advance. You know, these things are scheduled like 5 years out. So unfortunately, with the pandemic, it has rattled a lot of museum exhibition schedules, but everyone is in the same boat. So this isn't one of those situations where it was canceled just because of the pandemic, because the doors weren't open. They canceled it because they didn't want to put in the work. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the core of the issue. And then to be a contemporary art museum, they say this line: contemporary museums must answer the call to represent the ideas and creatives of our time. Yeah, no shit. I don't know. Like, that's what a contemporary museum has always done.
I'm
like,
glad you understand what the definition is of your own institution. But...
Right, like, why? I'm sorry, but like, why are you like feeding this line to us as if it's like a new mission that they have? Like, you are built on the idea that most of your artists are living artists. Like, isn't that part of your, I don't know, contracts, your paperwork, your programming? Like, was Sean Leonardo like not going to come at all to the show? Like, what kind of involvement was happening here? It just is so strange to me that they would put this sentence in and then treat it as if it was like a new idea. And then on top of that, it's like, okay, not just contemporary museums, but you're talking about, you know, as a nation, we are demanding more from our museums. Like, yeah, we this should be happening in every facet of our life. And contemporary museums are not the only museums who should honor that. There are lots of museums and galleries that aren't just strictly contemporary, but that, you know, I'm talking with family members, talking with the people who were actually impacted by the artwork that's being created. Like, I just saw this Sunday morning episode where the Met had like this Alice Neal exhibition, but they had like Alice's son and I think his wife, so Alice's daughter-in-law, and that was so cool. And they came to the show and they were on Sunday morning. But like, just thinking about the people who are like, art is a lived contemporary experience. I think that maybe that's the point that I'm trying to get at, is that like, art in the moment for us is contemporary. Stop treating it like it's this static thing that just exists on a wall.
No, yeah.
Because that's not it.
Yeah. And again, I mean, just to go back to the statement holistically, I would just like a transparent statement that suggests I have brought these people in, and it's not because I just am bringing them in to put up on a pedestal and have them work on shows and re-explain their trauma and their oppression to us constantly. Instead, I would like a statement that represents why we brought these people in and why I won't just stand on the sidelines and let these people come in and clean up my own fucking mess.
Yep.
So, once an art news story, always an art news story.
Oh, that's depressing.
Yeah, a little bit. I missed bumming you guys out.
All right. Well, should we take a little break?
Yeah.
Take a breather.
Take a breather.
If you're listening, grab a glass of wine, because we're going to come back and we're just going to, like, rant some more.
We are back, and I did not listen to Bianca's advice, and I have only been drinking coffee because my Brita filter is currently in my other apartment, so I have drank no water this morning, and that is coming back to bite me in the ass.
That is not good. Drink water.
When Bianca and I were figuring out what we wanted to talk about today, we were laughing so hard in our Google Doc because that is where everything goes down. That's where the tea happens. And
it'll be funny because, like, I'll be working in the Google Doc and then Gianna will start working in it, and then, like, we'll just type with each other, and for some reason it's more fun than just, like, texting with you. It's like,
yeah,
ooh, what are you gonna type? What are you gonna type? I'm, like, watching you think.
I know. So it was really funny when we came to the same conclusion about artistic movements. Like, we really didn't even talk about it prior. Again, they just happened in the Google Talks, and we were like, oh yeah, also, like, this is not it. So our thinking of this topic happened to revolve around war and how it dramatically impacted and created new art movements in response. And although this is terribly, terribly fascinating and is a must know when looking at art historical canon, it's also just not my favorite thing to talk about. Like, war sucks and it's not fun, and I don't like how that has impacted things. Like, it's not a fun part of history. Like, I know there are people that are, like, really into war and, you know, they'll watch, like, you know, PBS documentaries about it all the time.
He loved the Civil War.
He loved the Civil War. Like, nah.
Terrible.
Also, we were already on the same page about hating on Cubism all the time on the pod, as I know you guys are. So we believe you guys get the picture with that. Done. Check mark.
Yeah, we don't need to hate on it because we hate on it like every episode.
So we get it. So I think we're going to spice things up today with the things that we love to hate on.
Yeah, it was really funny watching this all come together because I think that there are a lot of things that we could hate on, but for some reason our initial responses were just like these items, and then when we looked at it as a whole timeline, I was like, there's something up with this here, and I think it's because people were dying. So we made a TikTok about this and we put it on our Instagram, and we were asking you guys what other types of art that you also hate on or, you know, just don't like, and it's okay not to like it, which we're going to get into. So I just want to read some of your responses. Okay, Cubism, that was definitely quite popular amongst the art pop-tarts. I have to give a shout out to Culture Quota because, oh my god, I just love her. Her TikToks just make me cackle so much. I love them. We got a few pop art. This person said pop art, especially Andy Warhol. I said what I said. I respect
it. No, mad respect.
I respect it. And then this person said pop art as well, but it might be more about me disliking a lot of the nostalgia stuff that people use pop art for now, which is what I love about pop art, actually. And they said A lot of it was meant to be satire about consumerism and culture, but I see it now used as this like quote unquote, oh, the 60s were better. And it's funny that this person says they don't like that about art when I love that exact thing about pop culture, because when I think about Andy Warhol just like smirking and laughing down at all of us for doing exactly what he thought we would do, it just, something about that makes me so happy.
But I understand. It's when we talk about this uncomfortable consumption of like problematic artwork, or how there's this mass consumption of it and it's misrepresented in its consumption. And so when you're on this other side of the spectrum, and then, you know, all these other people are, you know, on the bandwagon and have collectively decided that this is how they want to appropriate art now, it's like cringy.
Yeah,
and I get that with pop.
Yeah, but I love it. That's what I love about it. Okay, so this person said, Giacometti, I will not elaborate. And I just thought you never have to elaborate for that answer. That is the perfect answer.
I don't know. I kind of want this art pop-tart to slide into my DMs and tell me how they feel about Tim Burton.
I do not like Tim Burton.
I do not like Tim Burton either. And if you didn't know, Tim Burton was inspired by Giacometti's figures, so it makes sense. It's scary.
They are terrifying. I don't like them. Why are they so
skinny?
Ew, I know. It's like they're little like stick figures, but scary. How can you make a stick figure scary? Anyway, we got some Pointillism, which I thought was interesting. Impressionism, Richard Serra, Bauhaus. I agree with that
Richard
one.
Serra, sisters,
yeah. Oh, I just saw a new one.
What?
Oh my gosh. This one hurts. This one does hurt. This person says, mine's Marina Abramovich the artist is present.
Oh,
I think it's trite. Not that it isn't art. Oh, I respect it. It's okay not to like it, but that one cuts me deep.
She's my girl.
That one hurts. I'm always hyping up Marina. I'm like, do you know the artist is present? Gotta watch that documentary. Oh, that one hurts. Ooh, that's tough. That's tough to move on from. But I love hearing what you guys have to say. I think it's so fascinating. And like, it just shows that like, there's all this shit out in the world. And like, we're just meant to hype it up all the time. But like, I've never heard someone say that they don't like Marina, or that, you know, they don't like Pointillism. I was a little shocked by the Pointillism. I was like, okay, let's go. So I wanted to think about why not like talking about things we don't like can be useful, or why we felt like this would make a good topic. And speaking of more things we don't like, I need to go off for a second on Gilmore Girls, because I just watched the show. I've never seen it before.
Really? That show sucks, and yet I watched the whole thing like twice.
Twice.
Yeah, because you know, you watch it like once, and then when I go through all the classic shows, then I just have it on in the background like a second time, you know?
So that's the thing I was looking for, which I need another one. Because I'm home in my apartment by myself, I like to have just something on in the background. Like when I'm working at my desk, I like to just have some noise around me, because I'm working from home all day and I just need some sounds. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna try Gilmore Girls. I've never seen it before. Supposedly it's like this iconic show. I don't know how this show made it through 7 seasons. I'm sorry, but so I have a theory about this show, and as I'm watching it, the plot of the show is not about the Gilmore Girls. It isn't. That's a subplot. The main plot of the show is about 2 fully grown women who don't know how to cook. And the whole point of the show is that they don't know how to cook, which lends them to the other places that they go to. So because they can't cook, they go to Luke's. Because they can't cook, they have Friday night dinner. Because they can't cook, Lorelai has a relationship with Suki. Because they can't cook, you know, Rory gets this like privileged ass life where she like flies across the world with this guy and he's always feeding her fancy dinners. Like, it's just, it is mind-blowing to me that the whole premise of the show is every single episode. Anyway, I'm moving on, but all that is to say that in this episode of Gilmore Girls, Lorelai and Christopher receive a Kiki Smith work. They receive this Kiki Smith, and it's like this wolf girl, print from Kiki, and they hate it. And it's like, the joke is that this is like a terrible piece of art, and like the viewers are supposed to know that they don't like it, but the parents, like Richard and Emily, know that it's this like prestigious gift of work that they are helping these young people like to build up their art collection. So I was thinking about that in tandem with this topic, because when Lorelai and Christopher had this reaction to where they hate this piece of art, they like viscerally cannot stand it, I was like, stop hating on it. It's Kiki Smith, And then I was like, Bianca, like, take a step back. Like, you are kind of like inherently, I think we in the art world are like built into this kind of like snobbish praise of art. It's okay not to like every single piece of art, but I was feeling like, I don't know, like there was like this tension between my want to give the people who didn't like the piece of art, justice in their feelings, but then there was this other part of me that wanted to explain to them why this piece of art was so great, even though I myself don't like every piece of art. So I was wondering, what are the ways in which we can have a productive conversation about why we don't like a piece of art? Because I feel like when adults say they don't like this piece of art, it's kind of like blown off, and it's just like, it's, they know that art is not for them, or they could never be part of the art world, or the art people are snobs, or like, we don't want to be associated with this kind of like elitist knowledge. Yeah. But actually, I want to have that conversation about why you don't like it, and let's talk about that to use it in kind of making art accessible.
Yeah, well, from an museum education perspective, that's very, very important. I think if I am talking to a group of people in a gallery or museum space, leading a tour, for example, I will ask them, maybe even just as a recap question, okay, what was your favorite thing in this space? Or what did you not or not like about it? Like, what piece maybe like didn't you connect with? Because that's okay. You don't have to like any of this in here. It's totally up to you. You can have your own thoughts about it. So when we're talking about our feelings about art, I also incorporate words that have, the other side of the spectrum of feelings, your dislikes. Why do you want to hate on it? Why aren't you connecting with it? I think what gets me with the Gilmore Girls example, if I could have been in that room, to be a fly on the wall that could speak to them.
A speaking fly.
Excuse me, sir? Are you there?
Are you there?
I wouldn't go into it as, you don't even know who Kiki is, which is very hard for me to do because I put that woman up on a very, very like problematic pedestal for myself. It's that I think the stigma with that piece, or typically her art, is because it's not necessarily aesthetically like pleasing or nice to look at, especially thinking of that image of the wolf girl. It's scary. I believe it's an etching, so it's a lot of skinny mark making, almost looks like a pencil drawing or like a pen drawing if you looked at it from afar. And it's kind of creepy. Her work is creepy, and that's why I love it. But I think it's this lack of education, or what we think art should be. It should be this aesthetically pleasing thing, and I should have something that is aesthetically pleasing perhaps in my home. So when you get handed a piece of artwork that's this creepy wolf child thing, and you're like, what the F? Like, yeah, that might be a little off-putting, like, oh, I didn't expect this, and now you want me to put this in my home? But instead of talking about like why you should instantly love this, or you should know who Kiki is, that's fine. Talk about what your initial reactions to are, why, and like dive into that. Why are your instincts that you don't like it? Because perhaps that actually might be the artist's intent. Like, Kiki is creating an off-putting image to talk about the way in folklore and in fairy tales like women are portrayed, and to spin that into different aesthetics, which is highly interesting. So I think those initial reactions are valid. We just need to dive into it a little deeper.
Right. And I feel like that's also an interesting, I don't know, combination when thinking about elitism and collecting, because to your point about hanging something in your home, I mean, I would, of course, hang a piece in my home.
I would hang Lilith on my wall, hang Lilith on the ceiling above my bed.
Truly. But that's just because I'm, we are us. But thinking about that idea of a collector owning something and being able to purchase something because it's prestigious, and then, normal people just wanting art that makes them happy. I think that is such another interesting component of kind of privilege and money in the arts, and what is building your collection and what is having something that you just enjoy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, Bianca, that's quite interesting to think about. The plot between Lorelai leaving her, rich, privileged family, that piece is very interesting, the way that the writers chose that, because there is a deeper thing happening with the relationships between the families, and how, right. Lorelai and Rory are supposed to be these, like, unprestigious people, living their, like, cool girl life in this small town. Like, they don't care about these other things.
Right.
Yeah.
And that makes me mad. I don't know what it is, but it's like the imbalance of the two families really just, like, I don't like.
Well, and I could get into, like, the whole, like, denying your privilege thing in the show that really bothers me. Oh, gosh.
Unreal. But I was thinking about, like, as a museum educator, I feel like not liking art is more encouraged at a younger age, when students kind of feel like they have more ease to saying how they truly feel about a work of art. But then when you're an adult and you're really kind of playing into these, like, learned cultural social dynamics, it goes back to that idea that, like, we're not liking something is the equivalent of, oh, you just don't get it.
Right.
Like, if you don't like it, you just don't get it. And right. In the art world, I feel like it's, like, kind of like this idea of, like, when a boy, or, like, every woman has gone through this, but when a boy says, like, oh, you just didn't get my joke, and you're like, no, I get it, I just don't think it's funny. Mm-hmm. So I like, think that's another kind of valid thing I want to bring into adult conversations and adult museum education, is, like, I understand this piece, I just don't like it.
Yeah.
I think people in the arts don't give enough credit to people learning about arts who actually understand this, but they just don't like it, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, so now we're going to move through a few examples, and when we initially came up with this idea, the first thing that actually came to my mind before all of the kind of war discussion was actually American landscape painting. And for me, it's, there are ties to kind of war and destruction, and it obviously, as we'll get into, it recalls this imagery of, like, manifest destiny and stolen land and bringing destruction to peoples and their cultures. In general, I just don't love landscapes. I really, strictly visually speaking, they bore me to tears. Give me a seascape, a good still life, a genre painting. But I cannot stand to look at just, like, a plain ass landscape. They don't appeal to me at all. I understand that they take skill and talent and oftentimes, training. I understand that. And I understand that they are beautiful works of art a lot of the time, but I just don't like them. So something important to remember about this conversation is that we're not shaming anyone else who likes these things. And that's exactly the point that Gianna and I don't want to keep doing, is us kind of saying, like, oh, you just don't get it. It's like, no, I get it. I just don't like it. And I wanted to also bring in, if you're interested, there's a lot of crossover here with our kind of Chromatica episode about kind of thinking about things that other people don't like and how you can feel so much passion for something, but when other people say they don't like it, it does kind of, like, bring you down a little. And then our interview with Yannicka Starfields, where he really plays into the idea of landscape in his work, and in that conversation I kind of tell him, like, usually I don't like landscapes, but through your work, I found like such a different appreciation for it. So just those 2 episodes if you're interested. For me, in general, landscapes have been taught with themes congeneric to American identity in particular. And for those of us living in the United States, we are very easily exposed to this type of landscape painting. And of course, there are different schools of painting, different styles, different artists, but I have my most strong feelings towards the Hudson River School and the work of Thomas Cole and his cohorts. Landscape emerged as a genre in American painting during the 19th century, and it is often said that Cole is the quote-unquote true founder of the American landscape tradition. And I have to read this quote from a Met article on this school because it literally started with, quote, "The Hudson River School was America's first true artistic fraternity." Blech. Its name was coined to identify a group of New York City-based landscape painters that emerged about 1850 under the influence of the English immigrant Thomas Cole and flourished until the time of the centennial. So basically, the school was made up of artists like Frederick Edwin Church, Albert Bierstadt, Asher B. Durand, and this was not an actual school, but just a group of those artists working in a similar location on a similar theme. Durand published a series of letters on landscape painting, which codified the standard of idealized naturalism that marked the school's production. And these letters are actually now available in the form of a book, which you can get anywhere you buy your books. But, I was looking for like a kind of a overall synopsis on the themes, and I learned that Durand wrote a monthly column in a publication called The Crayon, in which he advised artists in the ways of landscape painting and answered, readers' questions. And an interesting excerpt comes from where Durand answers a reader's question about how to best understand and portray the elements of a landscape. And Durand's response is as follows, quote, "Dear sir, I refer you to nature early, that you may receive your first impression of beauty and sublimity, unmingled with the superstitions of art. For art has its superstitions as well as religion. That you may learn to paint with intelligence and sincerity, that your work shall address themselves to intelligent and sympathetic minds, and spare you the mortification of ever seeing them allotted to swell the lumber of the garret and the auction room." And part of me was like very pleasantly surprised by this idea that your art can kind of supersede a manipulated value of the auction room. But then this idea that nature is for the intelligent and sympathetic minds, I feel like those minds, Durand is catering that to a upper-class white man. Back to Cole. Khan Academy writes that during the 19th century, this was an expansive time that saw the elevation of landscape painting to a point of actually national pride. And ironically, Cole obviously wasn't born in America, but in England. And Cole's work, in tandem with this pride, found this, quote, aesthetic voice to lift the genre of landscape painting to a level that approached history painting. So this is kind of a key point. During the 18th and 19th century, large-scale historical compositions, paintings that often had this kind of instructive moral message, were actually favored by the Academy and by patronage. In landscape painting, in contrast, they were often more thought to kind of imitate than innovate. And what Cole ends up doing is painting landscapes that were really not entirely about the land, but they had these kind of deeper messages. In these works, Cole uses the land as a way to say something he found important about the United States. I want to talk about one of his most famous works, and probably one that you've, seen in class before, called The View from Mount Holyoke, Northampton, Massachusetts, After a Thunderstorm, or The Oxbow, from 1836. And at first, this seems like a regular old painting of the Connecticut River that someone like myself, might seem bored with if you don't like landscapes. But to make matters even less appealing than they already are, when viewed through the lens of a 19th century, kind of political mindset, this painting is actually made worse by looking at this kind of symbolism of westward expansion. So the painting is actually literally split in half to elicit this idea of manifest destiny, where on the left or western side is this kind of like untamed, unruly, and wild landscape. And then on the right or the eastern side, that has already been combed over by civilization. There's animals, pastures, and homes. So this painting, at first you're kind of looking at it and it's just a landscape, but when you look deeper, it so clearly exhibits this idea of taking stolen land or, stealing more land. And so it's not my favorite. I don't love it.
Yeah, and it's funny the way that this painting is broken up literally in two sections. On the left, you read it as uncivilized, and then the right, you read it as civilized. The funny thing...
And even that terminology is so gross.
It's gross, but if we're putting it in terms of this whole manifest destiny shit and the ways in which it was wrote about and talked about historically,
right,
like that's a terminology that I feel as though I must use into also bring it into a contemporary setting. I also think the funny thing with landscape painting is there is always a little Easter egg in there. There's always like a little tiny like person or like something that you're supposed to find that's maybe supposed to keep you intrigued. And you know me, I love a good Easter egg. I love a good little nugget. But it's definitely not enough to keep me super invested. And I think in this one, I can't remember. Does he paint himself?
Yeah, Thomas Cole does like to insert himself into his paintings.
It's like
I don't think I see a self-portrait in the oxbow.
Well, there's like an umbrella or something. There's some kind of indicator of a man-made element.
Yes, object.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about in our discussion is, again, coming out of similar circumstances and time periods. So while we were getting into the script, clearly this is a very rant-like style, and Bianca and I have a lot of thoughts on a lot of things. So I was going to talk about German Expressionism, which was coming out of early 20th century and emphasized the artist's inner feelings or ideas over replicating reality, and also starting to critique power, government structure, things like that. We have the Blue Rider movement, which the only artist that I like is truly Kandinsky. Everything else it's very like blocky, gestural, something about it that I just don't really like. The symbolism with the horse is supposed to, talk about power, but also freedom. And you have those constructs between kind of what we were talking about a little bit, kind of like organized government and also like nature and, the will of the people, perhaps. But visually, it's just not for me. So Bianca is actually going to take us into Italian Futurism, which, let me just tell you, this was fucking hilarious when me and Bianca were just typing in our script, and I was like, oh, German Expressionism, yeah, I don't like that. And also, another thing I might get into another day is Russian Constructivism. If you've ever taken a graphic design class, you've probably talked about Russian Constructivism, and it's really funny. It's a funny thing in art history also when you talk about projects or historical projects, works of architecture that actually did not exist. They're just projects that were supposed to come to fruition and they didn't, but for some reason it's still such a big deal that we have to talk about things that literally don't exist. And it's fascinating, but it's stupid. And when Bianca was talking about Italian Futurism, you might think that might be something we're on board with. And it's interesting, but I think visually speaking, maybe it's just not for us.
Yes, so I'm going to talk about Italian Futurism, and it does kind of pain me a little bit to talk about this because as Italians, we have that Italian pride, and, it's just, we have created, I say we, like, I'm totally, we have
collectively
have made so much beautiful art, you know, over the centuries. And I'm just going to say, futurists, we missed the mark on this one big time. So
taking one
Italian,
for the team on this
one.
It's good to hate on us a little bit in this episode too.
Yeah, we have Italian, you know, like experience. True. We're being so humble right now.
We are so humble.
Really hating on ourselves, and it's all gonna be fine. So, Italian Futurism was started by a man named Filippo Tommaso Marinetti in 1909. That year, Marinetti published his Futurist Manifesto. Love a good manifesto.
I don't.
Where he basically threw a fit about all the things having to do with cultural tradition. And this is passatismo in Italian. Now, you might be thinking like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like sometimes, you know, especially when we're thinking about our current cultural climate here in the States, we're like, ooh, tradition is bad, you know, like it's good to kind of shake things up. Let's think about progress. Let's think about futurism. Let's think about this like infrastructure bill, you know? But however, this was not exactly what Marinetti was, you know, proposing. This loser was actually calling for the destruction of museums, libraries, and feminism. And whatever, I'm not surprised that a man said he doesn't like feminism, but like the museum part I think is like the most ironic for me, considering that the only time I see Italian futurist art is like now in museums, and it's just canonized like in our Western art history books.
I just feel like this is a classic example of a man being, I'm gonna do something like totally outside the norm, and like I'm not in with, you know, the
just you wait.
Okay.
Just you wait, because it is so funny that they think how outside the box they are, and
right.
Like they are the most in the box anyone could ever be. Futurism was marked by traits like technological advancement, movement, speed, industrial development, youth, and basically things that were just exciting to like white men with anger problems. Futurists made a conscious effort to pull away from all things tradition. However, they thought that painting was still the medium of choice for them. There's a little bit of sculpture thrown in there, but like it's mostly painting, okay?
And the painting highly reflects cubism. Wow.
Okay, here's the thing. They were interested in experimental use of color and the optic of play. Like, hello, Impressionism.
For someone who wanted to burn down libraries, you sure as hell took a definition out of a book for what cubism is.
So then, in the fall of 1911, Marinetti and the futurist painters visited the Salon d'Automne in Paris and saw Cubism in person for the first time. And Cubism had an immediate impact on these Italian guys, such as Umberto Boccioni, Carlo Cara, Luigi Russolo, Gino Severini, Giacomo Balla. Nevertheless, the Futurists declared their work to be completely original. And it's just, you know, of course, it's just like some genius artist to claim that their work is original when literally nothing is, because everything inspires the next thing. Nothing is original. A term that is often associated with this movement is dynamism, which I really like that word, dynamism. It's a good word. Which, according to the Art History Babes Honest Art Dictionary, comes from the Greek word for power, dynamis. They write that, quote, "The theory is that all phenomena can be explained as manifestations of force. If something is dynamic, it is constantly changing. It is the opposite of static, which means staying the same." And given that the founding idea of futurism is basically against all things tradition, this idea of dynamism kind of makes sense, this movement, this progress. And there are two works of art that you may be particularly familiar with to illustrate this idea. And both of them, I just, like, it's like, all right, what's the hype for this one, you know? The first is Umberto Boccioni's bronze work, Unique Forms of Continuity in Space, from 1913.
It's a bold choice for the word unique.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing that out there.
So think about, you know what this looks like? Joey wearing all of Chandler's clothes. And he's like, I better not do any lunges. And Joey's just wearing a ton of clothing and he's doing a lunge. That's exactly what this work looks like, except it's bronze. And imagine you put like a big fan in front of Joey so his clothes are kind of like blowing around.
Yeah,
like,
and he's in the middle of his lunge.
Yes. So this work exemplifies the goal of futurists with man actually becoming machine itself. Obviously, we have this kind of industrial material, right? It's this big kind of clunky sculpture. It does kind of remind you of a machine, and clearly it does look like a body of sorts, but it's so covered up by this kind of like bulkiness that, and it kind of looks like this figure's also wearing like a helmet maybe. Also, for me, I was reading some articles where they compared this to Nike of Samothrace, and I just have to say, like, do not bring my girl Nike into this situation, because I think Nike of Samothrace is like one of the most beautiful pieces ever created by people on the planet. It is perfect.
But I think it's interesting in terms of material and in terms of sculpture. You know, you're saying, oh, if Joy was in his lunge, but a big gust of wind was blowing his clothes away.
Yeah, that does look like Nike.
It does, in the sense that it's so funny, though, to say with their definition of being so unique that you're deferring from all types of, you know, traditional forms of sculpture, which is just really not the case. Like, you're actually really playing into that history clearly, and that's totally fine. You can play into the history and critique it, but
to deny it. And to be so oblivious that you are working in those exact lines.
Right, which doesn't put you outside the norm. Like, that is the continuity of art history, and you're just playing into that, which is why we study Italian Futurism. I don't know. And then the same thing happens as you're about to bring up, Bianca, with Duchamp's news Descending the Staircase. Duchamp is just playing and talking about the artwork that came before him.
Well, here's the thing. Boccione's piece is from 1913. And every time I see this work, it reminds me of Duchamp's Nude Descending the Stairs, which was actually presented in 1912 at the Salon des Indépendants in Paris, which was rejected by the Cubists for being too futurist. Interessant.
Bianca.
Interessant.
That is fascinating. Whoa. I
just think it's hilarious.
I don't get, like, stumped that much these days, but I mean, that little blurb that I just spit out there was, you know, going back into my intro to art history, you know, comparative analysis, and I don't know if I was taught that.
Well,
maybe I was, and I just maybe chose to reject that information because that's super effed.
It's just so funny that this Duchamp Nude Descending the Stairs, it was on the cover of one of my art history textbooks, so I kind of like have this like weird association with this piece because it reminds me of like class. It's not the worst Duchamp thing I've ever seen, but it's totally based in that idea, which actually works well looking into our next piece, this idea of capturing a figure in motion in a single image. So how does a work of art capture movement in something that's still, which is what Duchamp is doing a year before this Boccione piece. But the next work, everyone loves this piece, and it's just like, what's the big deal? I'm sorry, it's just like, I don't get it.
I would say that I think the narrative is a little bit more cute and interesting to me than unique forms of continuity in space.
Yes, and out of all the futurist works of art, this one visually, I think, it's less cubist, which is interesting, and more on the lines of that kind of Duchamp and Boccione. This is Giacomo Balla's Dynamism of a Dog on a Leash from 1912, the same year as Duchamp's Nude. What we see is basically a little dachshund in the lower left corner, and then its owner walking the dog, but the owner, we only see the bottom of kind of like what I'm presuming to be a skirt, and feet. But we get, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 kind of feet that are walking around. And then with the dog, we see what is supposed to be representative of kind of his tail wagging and his feet moving. And then we have this really delicate leash that seems to be kind of, when you maybe, when you have a sparkler and you try to write your name and you get the kind of like leftover faded image of a letter that you've just written with your sparkler, or when you're jumping rope and you can kind of see this eternal, I don't know, because it's moving so quickly, like this image of the rope still moving. It kind of looks like that. So the artist is playing with this idea of continuous movement through space over time. In particular, they're looking towards Etienne Jules Marais, whose chronophotographic time-based studies depicted the mechanics of animal and human development. In the States, I would probably compare this to something like Edward Muybridge's, horse photos, where he's trying to capture what a horse looks like running.
I think maybe why I like this one more is perhaps I'm just more interested in that history of stop motion and looking at this piece in Italian Futurism and comparing it to works of animation and stop motion, whereas in the other work of art, it's like we're pretending that we're not taking like Cubist definition, right out of the book.
Well, that's a really interesting point, like taking away the kind of film and cinematic aspects of particularly dynamism of a dog, because with, German Expressionism, Italian Futurism, there are also film history movements that are comparable to the artistic movements as well. So not only are they happening in kind of fine art, visual art, they're also happening in cinema as well of that time. So that's a really interesting point you make, Gianna. Notice that with these two pieces, I kind of did not pick out pieces that look at war and machinery. There are quite a few examples where you kind of see like cannons facing toward the viewer, and for me they're just so unpleasant I didn't even want to talk about them. But I want to just finish up this discussion with what happened in the movement. So Futurism was one of the most politicized art movements of the 20th century, and it merged artistic and political agendas in order to propel change in Italy across Europe. Also, I saw that one of the artists I mentioned named his daughter Propeller because he was a futurist and interested in technology.
Ew, that's like Elon Musk naming his kid after an equation.
It really is. Yeah. Khan Academy's Smart History article reads that the futurists would hold what they called futurist evenings, where they would recite poems and display art while also shouting politically charged rhetoric at the audience in the hope of inciting a riot. They believed that agitation and destruction would end the status quo and allow for the regeneration of a stronger, energized Italy. Woo. So
what does this remind you of?
Oh gosh. These positions led the futurists to support the coming war, and like most of the group's members, actually the painter Boccioni, the one who did the sculpture, enlisted in the army during World War I. And after the war, the members' intense nationalism led to an alliance with Benito Mussolini and his National Fascist Party. Although Futurism continued to develop, new areas of focus and attracted new members, the movement's strong ties to fascism, became complicated to say the least. And that includes the study of the artworks as well, because they do become so tied to that party. Last thing I want to say, maybe for another episode, actually I definitely would love to do an episode on this. I was reading, of course, I don't know why, but it popped up, and I was reading this article from the Guggenheim, and the article stated, quote, while predominantly effeminate, the movement of Italian Futurism had actively female participants. And then it just like drops off, and it doesn't say any of the names of these active female participants, like none whatsoever. So because, we're hating on this canonical movement today, I didn't include any of these women because truthfully, they have never been brought up in any of my courses. I don't know anything about their work, so I would love to revisit this topic in another episode, and I'd be very curious to kind of compare these active female participants of the Italian Futurist movement to this kind of like male-dominated, misogynistic, anti-feminist group of artists that align themselves with a fascist party. So I would love to revisit, but quickly, because I was pissed off that the Guggenheim just like didn't give me any names to look at. I wanted to read some off, and if you're interested, go look at them, but we'll revisit this another time. So Giannini Sensi, Bice Lazzari, Regina Bracci, and Benedetta Kappa, who only went by her first name, Benedetta, but big yikes here with Benedetta. She wrote essays exploring women's place in the fascist state, saying, quote, "I am too free and rebellious." And she told this to the futurist founder, Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, quote, "I do not want to be restricted. I only want to be me." Which sounds nice. Again, kind of like, some of these ideas, they sound nice, progress, advancement, but then she married Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, and like, I don't know about that whole situation. So I'd like to explore that a little bit more, but I wanted to give you some names just quickly because why the Guggenheim felt like, they could just drop that and not talk about it. I don't know.
Well, of course they felt that way. That's very in the norm for them. It's funny to now talk about fascism roped into this artistic movement because, what do feminists and cubists have in common?
Yes, but is it art?
But is it art? Do they hate fascism? But here
I hope you're listening.
Freaking Italian Futurism, mixing shit up.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, spicy.
Go listen to our interview with Anna Blake.
Hey, girl, hey. All right. Well, I really liked this episode.
This was fun.
Yeah,
I'm excited
really
to do
fun.
another one like this where you can talk about. I have a lot of thoughts about German Expressionism.
Yeah, I just don't really like it. I just don't.
That's okay. It's okay not to like it. So hopefully this was, you guys thought it was productive. We definitely want to hear from you, what you think about the conversation, what is art that you don't like, and why should we keep talking about it? Should we keep talking about it? I don't know. All right, remember that you can email us with thoughts, comments, concerns. artpoptalk@gmail.com. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or you have Apple Podcasts on your phone, if you wanted to go over and rate us, leave us a review, that would be amazing. I see that most of you are listening on Apple Podcasts in our stats. We are on Instagram. We have a Facebook group. We're on Twitter. We're on TikTok. And remember to use code APT50 at hungryharvest.net for 50% off your first purchase of a Harvest Box. And with that, Gianna, I think we'll talk to you on Tuesday.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Artpop Talk's executive producers are me, Bianca Martucci-Fink.
And me, Gianna Martucci-Fink.
Music and sounds are by Josh Turner, and photography is by Adrian Turner.
And our graphic designer is Sid Hammond.